What's up everyone, friends of Video Daily. This is Alessandro and I'm finally back after a while. It took me a couple of months to decide to record this video because I was waiting for the release of some sets like Eternal Drain that introduced some incredible spicy cards to the modern format, like Oko that now is tried pretty much in every single Sultai build. Once Upon a Time that is pushing Neo brand over the top. We have Emery providing new power to Where's decks. So even Throne of Eldraine, that seems to be very mild in power, is providing very powerful stuff. We had War of the Spark with all the Planeswalker with crazy abilities. We had Modern Horizon that shook the format like no other set did, and lead to the banning of Hogak and Faithless Looting, and of course the unbanning of Stoneforge Mystic. And since this deck is a reactive strategy, has to undergone very profound changes to adapt itself to this new format. So we've seen a lot of Azorius and a blue-white based deck introducing Stoneforge package into their deck. I don't think that belongs to Jeskai Control. Perhaps a mid-range version is better suited, but this one is a straight control list. You can see right now a little sneak peek of what it's coming, but I'm gonna tear this deck down in sections and I will tell you everything about that section. Of course, perhaps you already seen some of the parts that I'm gonna talk about, but you know, it's just a full-on take on this deck. First, we have to introduce Snapcaster Mage. This is probably a best creature, one of the best creature of modern, of the whole modern format. Essentially is a 2-1 that comes with flash, with one generic and one blue. And the most important part of this card is what it says into the text box, where it says that you can provide flashback to a spell in your graveyard, instant or sorcery. This is so important because this deck, you will see, is based on 90% of spells, either sorcery or instant, and so it's gonna be critical for us to rebuy back those cards that we already used to provide even more value that we have right now. This will be essentially one of the key pieces of our deck, because when we are able to do some 2-for-1s or many 2-for-1s or even more with Supreme Verdict, as you will see, we are getting an edge on our opponents that instead are trying to grind out with creatures, with, I don't know, planeswalkers or stuff. If we are able to keep up with them with 2-for-1ing and a lot of trades 1-for-1, we probably come out on the upper side. But the most important part of the new format, that as we've seen from War of the Spark, are the new Planeswalkers. In fact, we are running 2 of them. In 2 Teferis, the new one, 3 CMC, 4 loyalties. The passive ability is so huge that is breaking formats, not only standard but also modern and legacy. And furthermore, Teferi has also other relevant options like the +1 that provides instant speed sorcery and -3 to bounce a permanent, essentially, that is not a land. Drawing cards. So you have card advantage, you have the perks, the bonus that provides with the passive abilities that is so huge because you can play everything at instant speed, what this deck wants to do, and your opponent cannot. That means that they cannot counter your spells, because how the stack works, you can play sorcery just when the stack is empty, and if you're playing something, the stack is not empty, so they cannot counter your spells. Then we have 2 copies of Jace the Mind Sculptor, probably the best Planeswalker ever printed, and you probably know everything that Planeswalker does. It's 4 CMC, for 3 loyalties, have +2, Fate Steal your opponent 0. It's pretty much one of the few ways we have in Modern to have a real brainstorm effect. -1 bounce a creature, -12 win the game. This is everything wrapped up with Jace the Mind Sculptor, probably, not probably, but the best Planeswalker in Modern with Legion of the Veil. And then lastly, we have Teferi, the big Teferi, 5 CMC, We have a +1 that draw cards and untap lands, the -3 that bounce permanents, and the minus the ultimate that pretty much wins the game. So this is the full package of Planeswalker. As you can see, there is a smooth increasing of value and also of power with the mana curve. We are starting with Teferi Time Raveler into Jace into Teferi, and if we're able to do so, or if our opponent is not interacting with us, probably the game they will steal the game because they are so powerful, and there are not many ways to interact with Planeswalker in Modern. And that's it for what concern permanent in this deck. Then next we have the spells, the spell package, starting with the draw spells. We are running 3 Serum Visions over Opt, in my opinion, because we're running Teferi, and also because we need to dig deeper and find lands, because it's critical in a 3 color decks if compared with something like Jeskai Control that has just 2 colors and runs a lot of basics. We need to find the pieces of the puzzle to assemble the 3 color pies of our mana base, and so Serum Vision is better since can draw you blank with the first one probably, or even draw you gas. You know, you can never know. And then you can scry 2. The scry 2 is so important because it lets you set the next 2 turns or the next 2 draws with something that you need, or ditch on the bottom of your library. Then we have Search for Ascanta, and I'm playing Search for Ascanta over Narset in the main board just because of that reason. Narset is not able to find lands. Instead, Search for Ascanta filters every single draws you have, deciding either if you need the card and so you can add to your hand and draw naturally the card, or if you can throw on the bean and then flip into the Ascanta the Sunken Ruin. That pretty much is an impulse effect that can go off every time you want, finding the cards you need. And this time you cannot find lands, but probably once Ascanta flipped, you already have all your lands on the battlefield, and you just need to get the value trains going to overwhelm your opponent in card advantage. This is pretty much the draw spells package, and now we are going towards the most important and key element for a control deck, the definition of control decks, so counterspells. Counterspells in Modern are an harsh argument because we have only few effective ways to counter stuff, but luckily for us, Modern Horizon provided what we need, Force of Negation. So right now the spell package is like the counterspell package is like this: Spellsnare at 1 CMC because there are so many powerful 2 CMC permanents or spells in Modern. 3 Logic Knots, that is the closest you can get to counterspell in Modern, unfortunately, and until we will have actually counterspell in Modern, we just can't play this spell. That it's not bad, don't get me wrong, but we can go better with an actual counterspell because this is critical in a matchup like Tron, where they can pay the X amount you're delving. So it becomes less relevant than it is, for instance, against other decks. And then we have 2 copies of Force of Negation. This is pretty much Force of Will for Modern. It exiles the spell it's countering, so it's pretty good. But we also need to keep in mind that to play Force of Negation, we have to reach a critical amount of blue spells, because to have the upside to play it for free, you have to ditch something from your hand that is blue. And then we have the other counter spell that is very prominent in Modern, and this is Cryptic Command. As you know, I always play this counterspell in every single metagame shift, because I think that it's probably the best card, one of the best cards of this deck. And even when everybody was playing this deck with 0 or 1 Cryptic Command, I always played with 3, because The value is amazing. You always have a 2 for 1 with this spell. You can choose to counter target spell, return permanent to its owner end, tap all creatures your opponent control, or draw cards. You can choose two. So every time you have the perfect pattern to, if you're aiming to close out the game, you can tap your opponent creatures, attack Wisdom Caster and Colonnade, and kill them. You can just, buy time by tapping all creatures on the combat step and draw cards, finding new answers. You can counter spells and draw cards. It's always a 2 for 1, and it's always relevant. So don't play less than 3. That being said, now we are skewing towards the part that where you can understand why we're playing Jeskai instead of Azorius, the removal spells. Playing red opened up to a million of spot removals, namely Lightning Bolt. Lightning Bolt is probably one of the most efficient way to deal with creatures. 1 mana for 3 damage, as it gets. We have Lightning Helix that is 3 damage and 3 life to us, and this is very relevant also when it comes to aggro decks or a burn, because you're buying back the life you're losing. And then Electrolyze, that not only can deal 2 damage spread across the board or your opponent face, but also cantrip, so draw you a card. This is so relevant right now, and I go back to play 2 copies of this spell because right now with this resurgence of affinity scales, humans, and you name it, Electrolyze is always relevant. And then, of course, 4 copy of Path to Exile, that is the removal spells of the format. You just can't go wrong playing 4 copies of Path to Exile. Okay, so you now understand why I'm playing Jeskai, because you have this option that no other decks has, or no other control decks has, to turn the corner. So you can just play Bolt, Snapcaster Bolt, those are 6 damage, and then you have Snapcaster ready to beat off your opponent, adding other 2 damage to their face, and that's another path that we have open if we are playing against a more controlish build, and so we understand we have to be the aggro, aggro deck, and so try to go faster than them. And lastly, we have, of course, Supreme Verdict. I'm running 2 copies of that effect. I've seen many other players of control decks splitting the rat package with 1 Supreme Verdict, 1 Wrath of God, and 1 Day of Judgment because of Meddling Mage. But since we are running so many spot removals, they have to name so many stuff that I don't think that we need to to torn the mass removal package. We just go with Supreme Verdict. That probably is the most powerful because it's uncounterable, and that's it. Later we have the lands. Of course, I'm running always the same amount of lands. I'm now to 23, just like I was in the previous versions. 7 fetch lands, namely we have Scalding Torn, Fluid Strand, and Arid Mesa, split 2-3-2. I'm running just 7 of them because I have to find space for the untap lands that came afterwards, because they are so many, and we being a 3-color decks, we need a critical amount of colored lands to provide the perfect mix of color that allows us to play spells. The Shockland are split 2-1 in Steam Events, Fountain, and Foundry. Since we have so many stuff with blue, of course we're running 4 Shockland and just 1 with the Boros colors. And then we have the other stuff. This is the section I was conceding the 1 spot of the Fatulant 2. I'm running 3 Celestial Colonnade, 2 Surful Falls, and this is one of the spot because Surful Falls, I need this red untap land, and then 2 Field of Ruin because they are very powerful way to destroy other players' mana base. Lastly, we are running 4 basic lands, 2 island, 1 plains, and 1 mountain. And that's it for the main deck. Now we have to talk about probably the most important part of every single modern deck, the sideboard. Because I've seen a lot of people misunderstanding or underestimating the importance of sideboard in modern. And since the format is so powerful and with a very high skill level, you always need to have the right answers in viable for you in the game 2 and 3 of the match. That's why we're running 2 Engineering Explosive and 1 Detention Sphere. They are catch-all, so you can just play them and resolve pesky permanent that your opponent can be playing. They're not in main because, of course, Detention Sphere is removable by John, that right now is a huge deck. I have 1 copy of Narset, part of the Veils. This card is warping formats and is crazy good, but as I told before, I need that critical amount of lands to get this deck going. So Narset is just not providing that critical amount of lands. So if I'm paired against other control decks, I'm going to take this one in main in 0 second. Then we have the creatures. 2 creatures, 1 Wendelian Click and 1 Exit Staticaster. Those 2 are very important because one is trying to prevent combo decks to go off, and the other one is nerfing all those token strategies and little creature strategies. I'm running also 2 counter spells, both of them with a depiction of Darwin. Ceremonious Rejection, very powerful against Tron and colorless stuff. Darwin's Veto, again, powerful against control and stuff that you, or combo decks that you want to stop. Then I have a whole lot of different enchantment and artifacts that are stopping our opponent and or nerfing them. Dumping Sphere against Tron, against Storm, Rune Hallow against pretty much everything that is dealing damage to us. Also combo decks. And last but not least, 2 copies of Stony Silence, because right now with the resurgence of Affinity, of Hardened Scales, and with the incredible and abrupt power of Wurza, you have to be packing at least 2 of them. Right. You were packing Graveyard Hate, that is the next section, against Dredge and Phoenix in the previous metagame. So for what concern Graveyard, 1 Settle, 1 Rest, and 1 Surgical. This is the split. I'm finding myself very comfortable playing with those cards. And this is pretty much everything for today. I hope you liked this video. Consider to like and subscribe, and if you haven't already, leave a comment in the comment section down below with some suggestion about this deck or the new and the next few topics that we're gonna cover in the next videos that I will try to do more often. That's a promise. But that's everything for today. So guys, as always, keep watching and stay tuned.